Throughout Advent, our Sunday morning worship services here at Knox Oakville have been focusing on the various nativity story characters and how their stories were influenced by or provided influence to other people in their families. The theme we've been using is called From Generation to Generation. You've seen a few of those slides already this evening. Each week, we took the opportunity to look at our own experiences and wonder together how our stories are woven together within our families and beyond, within the communities that we inhabit, and generations of people to which we belong. We began at the start of Advent with a genealogy from Matthew's Gospel. So-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so. It was riveting. In that long list of names, we are invited to remember the trauma and the triumph of those who came before. Some names and stories were more familiar than others. Some were downright scandalous. We reflected on how each of those names held a story, and each of those stories gave way to Jesus' story. Each story is woven together into a larger tapestry, and God works through all these unexpected people and stories of the past and present, just like us. There is room for our story. And more than that, our story, with all of its highs and lows, triumphs and tragedies, our story is important. Actually, I would go so far as to say our story is necessary. My story is always connected to your story, and yours is always connected to mine. The second week of Advent, we were with Mary at the moment when the angel announced to her that she would bear the Messiah. We reflected on the various kinds of fear that she might have experienced in that moment, and the different kinds of fear that we experience in our lives. Fear of survival, fear of failure, fear of a spoiled reputation, fear of judgment, fear for the future, just to name a few. And ultimately, we landed on the truth that God meets us in our fear. You see, we have wrongly equated faith with the absence of fear. That's not what it is at all. It isn't the absence of fear. Faith isn't the absence of fear, it's the absence of feeling alone in our fear. We are never alone. God is with us in it. Next, the third week of Advent, we traveled to Joseph's story from Matthew's Gospel. Joseph, a righteous, God-fearing man, knew that the law insisted that his fiancée be judged harshly and publicly for becoming pregnant outside of marriage. Breaking a marriage contract was punishable by death. Going against his upbringing then, Joseph chooses to bend the rules and simply dismiss Mary quietly. But then an angel appears to him in a dream and suggests that, Joe, you might do one better. Rather than dismissing her, you're invited to uphold your engagement with Mary and adopt this baby as your own. Adopt him into your family, Joseph, into your family's history and generations upon generations of stories. We can choose a better way. We can always choose a better way, and the impact can ripple out for generations. And then last Sunday, we were with Mary and Elizabeth, and the way that they saw God within one another. Elizabeth, Mary's much older cousin, was pregnant with the one who would one day be known as John the Baptist. And Elizabeth had the religious authority, the religious clout, to lay waste to Mary's reputation. Instead, she welcomes her young cousin in and declares that the child in Mary's womb was the Lord. She is the first person in any of the Gospels to do so, and the only woman in Luke's Gospel to utter those words. Like Elizabeth, we meet people who find themselves at the threshold of something new, and that can be a really scary place for them to be. So like Elizabeth, we can choose radical acceptance and love. We can hold space And in so doing, we could loose in them a song of liberation and praise. After Elizabeth welcomes Mary and the child in her womb with such love, Mary herself bursts out into a song of prayer and praise, a song of revolution and liberty. So we asked the question last week, who do we know in our own lives who are on the edge, who are in a liminal place, standing at a threshold? Can we choose, like Elizabeth, to see the divine within them? Tonight, we end our series, and we're in the big story now. The one we came here to hear, the one we come year after year to hear preached. We sing the words in our carols and hymns. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. Like Linus from a Charlie Brown's Christmas, we could almost recite it from memory if only we could hold our blankie. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting her first child. Flashbacks now to like childhood pageants, right? Christmas pageants with little Mary and Joseph in bathrobes and tea towels for headscarves. I can't be the only one, come on. Away in a manger, floating over the chaos of the like pint-sized Actors Guild. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. Except there was no inn. I'll let you sit with that for a minute. For those of you who have been around Knox for a while or have been exposed to my Christmas Eve sermons over the years, my apologies, know that I do take disturbing pleasure in unraveling our long-held ideas about the Christmas story. Whether it's explaining that the Magi were never at the birth of Jesus, they didn't show up till almost 2 years later, so get them out of your nativity scenes, or that the shepherds were likely young kids, probably girls, since that's traditionally who took on such a demanding task, especially at nighttime. Or that there's no mention of a donkey or Mary riding on one. I like to highlight the errors we have adopted and propagated over the years, like this one. There was no inn. Which I guess is bad news for the dozens of Christmas pageants who have assigned a role for the innkeeper, because there's no innkeeper either. The Greek word used, did you know you were coming here Christmas Eve for a Greek lesson? Lock the doors. The Greek word used is kataluma, which does not mean inn. It means guest room. The other time we see it used is when Jesus gathers for the Passover dinner with his disciples in the kataluma, in the upper room or the guest room. Inns didn't exist. We've created a story where the young couple goes to check in at a Motel 6, but those didn't exist. And if there were places for room and board, they wouldn't be found in some backwater town like Bethlehem, where the welcome and goodbye signs are on the same pole. No. People stayed with family when they traveled. And since it was to Joseph's family's town that they traveled for the census, I'm waiting for the penny to drop, it would have been to Joseph's family member's home that he and Mary would have went. Most of us can probably relate at this time of year. How many of us tonight are either visiting or hosting relatives over the week ahead of us? So reflect for a moment how this absolutely changes everything that we think we know about this story. What does it mean that Mary and Joseph showed up to the home of one of Joe's kin? Let me suggest an alternate image for you. Have you ever watched Home Alone? Nobody's watched Home Alone? Yes, okay, oh boy, because I don't have an alternate story to tell here. If you haven't watched it, now you know what you get to do over the holidays. The movie begins with a family preparing to go on holidays together. Kevin, the protagonist, is a kid in this family, and his parents' home is being used as the meeting place for all the various branches of the family tree to gather before they go to the airport. The joke is that in the hustle, and this isn't giving too much of the plot away, don't worry, in the hustle and bustle to get out the door on time, Kevin gets left behind, hence Home Alone. But roll the film back to the various branches and generations of family gathering at Kevin's house. That's what it would have been like for many people's homes as the census forced people to migrate back to their hometown. Joseph's hometown was Bethlehem. It's likely that a number of Joe's family traveled back to Bethlehem, and it is very likely that a member of Joseph's family hosted all the out-of-town relatives as they arrived, like Home Alone. The place would have been packed. But unlike Home Alone, houses in the first century in the Middle East were anything but sprawling multi-story mansions. Whew, it's a big house in Home Alone. The ones in our scriptures were usually two-room, not two-bedroom, two-room constructions with like maybe a roof you could sleep on if it got too hot. The house would have been packed when Mary and Joseph showed up. Multiple people would have been crammed into the kataluma, the guest room, the upper room. The homeowners likely either took their sleeping mats to the roof, or else they laid their mats down on the main floor, the main living room, on the main floor when people first came in. And that is also the room where the animals would be kept during the night. A family's livestock, its goats, cows, donkeys, and so on, would have been brought inside at night to keep them warm, safe from predators and thieves. They were a family's most valuable possession, so you wouldn't leave them outside at night. So Joseph walks up to the home of his relative, and he knocks on the door. I wonder if the family was already expecting him, actually. Joe the carpenter, who moved away from the family village to excel in his carpentry business. Oh, and he's got Mary with him. Great, we'll get to meet her before the wedding, but wait, ooh, she's pregnant, very pregnant. Shocked faces would have moved from her belly to Joseph's face real fast. Whiplash. What have you two done? A child out of wedlock? The questions must have been written all over their faces. But then, before anyone could even utter one of those questions, Mary cries out and grabs her belly. The baby, he's coming. So what was the homeowner to do? Stick her on the roof? Yeah, I don't think so. That wouldn't do. The upper room, the kataluma, was packed already. Plus, nobody's going to sleep if you've got a laboring woman amongst 30 family members. So the only option left, the main room, with the animals. It's better than nothing. They'd be indoors, they'd be safe, there'd be some privacy for the poor girl as she labored with her first child. Here's what that family would not have done. They would not have turned Joseph and Mary away. Hospitality wasn't just a virtue, it was etched into their bones as Middle Eastern Jewish people, the same way it is for the Scottish and the Irish, many other nationalities. There is no chance, zero, that they turned a laboring woman out into the night, sending her and her fiancé off to some barn in the dark to bring their child into the world alone. Would you? No. Rather, Mary would have been brought inside immediately and tended and cared for by the women in Joseph's family, maybe his own mother, or his sisters, his aunties, or nieces. Mary would have been encouraged and counseled, hydrated, and fed as she labored through the night. This is not looking anything like our Hallmark cards, eh? So where did we get the idea that Jesus was born in a stable? The Bible doesn't even say that. Go check, I'll wait. The Pew Bibles are red. We've literally written that whole concept in. The problem with the stable is that it distances Jesus from the rest of us. It puts even his birth in a unique setting, in some ways as remote from ordinary life as if he had been born in a palace. But the message of the incarnation, of the God of the cosmos putting on flesh and moving in among creation, that message is that Jesus is one of us. He came to be what we are. And it fits well with that theology that his birth, in fact, took place in a normal, crowded, warm, welcoming Palestinian home, just like any other Jewish kid born that day. But what about the manger, say you? Yeah, that can stay, says I. There were mangers, feeding troughs on that main floor inside the family house that held hay and wheat for the animals. Wouldn't it make sense to wrap up and snuggle a newborn into that space rather than laying him on the floor? I'm willing to bet he didn't stay in the manger very long, though. Too many relatives who wanted to snuggle him, I'm sure. So what does this do to our story? It's rocked my world for the past week, I'll tell you that. And I've been doing this gig for a while, so. This story we know and love and can recite by heart. What if Jesus wasn't born in an isolated place, rejected by villagers and Motel 6 managers? What if Jesus was born in a house bursting with relatives and all generations? What if Jesus' birth story is about overflowing hospitality, where accommodations are made for travelers? What if, rather than being born in some unfathomably isolated place under bizarre circumstances, Jesus was born in a very ordinary way, with relatives around and the family pets inside a simple home? Doesn't that actually make for a better story? One that aligns more with the message of the incarnation, that God is with us, nestled right there among family and friends. I wonder if we can embrace this truer version of the nativity story, accepting that it opens up a whole new perspective on what it means that Jesus came as one of us. It's disruptive. I get it. I really like that. It's disruptive to our traditional nativity scenes on the mantle, but they might be a worthy sacrifice. Just imagine that the infant so lowly, so holy, was not hidden away in either an isolated stable or in the carefully prepared guest room with its special guest room towels and bedding, but came into the world in the midst of the main living space with all its chaos and noise. Because if we can accept that vision, then maybe, just maybe, it's easier to imagine Jesus joining us in the chaos and noise of our lives. For Luke, Jesus isn't pictured as being born over there, away from everyday life, inviting us to visit once a year on Christmas Eve. Rather, Jesus is born in the heart of the home. He isn't pictured as rejected, inviting us to pity him, but as welcomed, asking us whether we will welcome him too. We tell this story every year. We tell this story because it illustrates so clearly God's desire to be in relationship with us. God cannot get enough of us. We tell this story because we too are invited to come to the manger and witness the miracle of birth. We tell this story because it brings us hope and it brings us good news, hope especially for those deemed powerless, unworthy, or unwelcome. We tell this story because it is a story we need to hear again and again and again. If we didn't tell it, what would become of our faith? And so on this night, we tell this story to pass along this good news and to continue to thread together the generations with hope. A story about how in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This God is love. This love came to us tiny and vulnerable, and love's mother snuggled him in bands of cloth and laid him momentarily in the manger. And the heavens opened with choirs of angels proclaiming to shepherds that love was born this night. God's love had moved into the neighborhood. Come and see, go and tell. We tell this story of love over and over, from generation to generation. A story of togetherness, care for one another, the ordinary and the miracle commingled. We tell this story of love so powerful, it can do no other than make its home right in our hearts, this night and every night. To God be all the glory. Amen.